Hey guys, I'll keep this short, but I hope everyone had a happy holidays, and sorry for missing last week's episode. Starting us off is Gabe on Tymna Tana. This deck is otherwise known as Blood Pod. It's a meta crusher deck, and tuned to a specific meta, it can often hold the entire table down, but only if tuned properly. Next up is Fernando on Brago. This Azorius artifact control list uses Brago's ability to both reset mana rocks and gain card advantage, abusing ETB effects. It's a slow and grindy deck that aims for the late game, utilizing an infinite combo with Strionic Resonator as a win con. In the third spot, we have Hidden on Tymna Thrasios. TNT is back, baby. This is a highly resilient value-based deck, aiming for infinite mana through Devoted Druid, Valley Floodcaller, or Kinnan Lines. And bringing up the rear is Rick on Najeela. This is a 5-color Thassaltation list that backdoors into an infinite creatures and combats combo with Najeela, who, if left alone, can just amass a horde of warriors to take their opponents out.
Alright, block there, kill that. Oh, that is trample. Guess I'm just dead on board.
Rick has a pregame action, as he puts a Gemstone Caverns into play, exiling an Exotic Orchard. Gabe starts off the game with an Arid Mesa, cracking the fetch for Scrubland, shortcutting as he casts an Esper Sentinel. Fernando has a tapped Hallowed Fountain, passing there. Hidden has a Tropical Island and feeds a card to Gabe as he casts a Mystic Remora. Rick plays out a Verdant Catacombs, cracking the fetch for an Underground Sea, tapping 2 for a Mind Blade Render. A Windswept Heath then comes out from Gabe, as he then follows it up with a Mox Diamond. He gives a card to Hidden and discards a Godless Shrine. He then cracks his fetch for a Taiga, and now having 3 mana, casts his Commander Tymna. Combat is next as the Esper turns sideways at Hidden, who can't block, with Gabe then paying a life to draw off Tymna. Fernando has a Flooded Strand as land and cracks it for a Tundra. He then taps 2 for Grim Monolith, feeding a card to Hidden and Gabe. Hidden untaps and pays for fish. He plays out an Ancient Tomb and discards a One Ring due to hand size. Rick plays out a Taiga and also casts his Commander Najeela. He then heads to combat and sends the Render at Hidden, with the 1/1 Warrior heading at Fernando. There are no effects, and Rick takes 1 to draw off his Render, passing after that. Gabe shocks in a Blood Crypt and exiles an Elvish Spirit Guide to cast a Soul Ring. Hidden draws, and Gabe then follows it up with a Goblin Bombardment. Hidden draws, but the enchantment resolves, with Gabe then casting an Orcish Bowmasters. But this is his third spell, as Rick then casts a Mindbreak Trap to exile it, with Hidden and Gabe drawing 1 more. Combat is then held as Tymna then heads at Fernando and the Esper at Hidden. Damage happens as Gabe pays 2 life that he gained to draw 2 more, passing there. Fernando has a Plains and casts his Commander Brago, passing after that. Hidden continues to pay for his fish, and while he is missing his land drop, he does find a Carpet of Flowers. He then moves to his second main to make 2 black mana off his carpet for his own Orcish Bowmaster. This time it resolves, and unfortunately for Hidden, he doesn't have a way of drawing Gabe a card, as he then pings the 1/1 Warrior instead, ending his turn discarding an Archivist of Ogma and a Silence. Rick plays out a Wooded Foothills and cracks a fetch for Scrubland. Rick then for 2 casts a Tainted Pact. Both Hidden and Gabe draw, with Hidden as a precaution, putting 1 damage on Najeela. Rick then starts exiling, and surprisingly stops early with a Ranger Captain. Next up is combat, as Gabe chooses not to kill Najeela, as both warriors, plus the additional 2 1/1s, all head his way. Gabe will take 6, and Rick takes 1 to draw off his Render, with this time Hidden finishing off Najeela, with Rick then ending his turn with an Arcane Signet, drawing Hidden 1 more card. Gabe shocks in an Overgrown Tomb, and for 4 casts a Rev, Tithe Extractor. The creature resolves, and Gabe then moves to combat. He sends Tymna at Rick, with the Esper heading at Hidden. On attack, Rev will give the Esper Death Touch, as Hidden blocks it with his Orc army. Unfortunately, this means Gabe will sacrifice the Esper to his bombardment to kill the Bowmasters. He gains 2 off the connect, and then exiles the top card of Rick's library, then paying 1 to draw on his second main off Tymna. Gabe will then use his gain treasure to cast Rick's Sylvan Safekeeper. Fernando untaps and casts a Talisman of Progress. Hidden draws, with Fernando then following it up with a Sabo's Web. Hidden draws, with Fernando getting a card off ETB. Fernando then heads to combat and sends Brago at Gabe, who takes the hit, with Fernando then blinking his board off connect. He then draws another card off the Sabos, with a Scalding Tarn then coming out his land for turn. Fernando then follows it up with an Aether Channeler, who resolves and attempts to bounce Gabe's Rev. Granted, Gabe will sacrifice his Blood Crypt to keep the creature's Shroud. Hidden untaps and lets his fish go. He'll make 2 green off his carpet and then chalks in a Watery Grave, using the floating green to cast his commander Thrasios, which is then followed up with the Bloom Tender. Unfortunately, Hidden is still having to discard due to hand size and decides to fire off a Deadly Rollick instead of discarding it. He probably should have pointed it at Rev to get another land from Gabe, but seeing as Fernando is starting to get an engine going, points it at Brago instead. Hidden then ends his turn with a Deathrite Shaman, still discarding an Eldritch Evolution due to hand size. Rick plays out a Polluted Delta as land and casts his Revealed Ranger Captain, who resolves, but in response to the ETB, Gabe flashes in an Opposition Agent.
And you were mocking me discarding Eldritch Evolution.
Well, actually, I was sitting on this since you were like, oh, only if you had your Oppo. I'm like, yeah, if only I kept up with 3rd mana.
Fernando and Rick will both crack their fetches in response, but the Oppo resolves and steals a Mockingbird from Rick. Rick then casts a Professional Facebreaker and ends the combat. He sends the Render at Fernando, who takes the hit, and draws Rick a card, with him passing after that. Gabe plays out a Cavern of Souls on Human. Next up is the Mockingbird for 3, which enters as a copy of Ranger Captain, this time grabbing him a Ragavan of his own. Gabe will then head to combat, sending Rev at Fernando, who takes the hit, gaining a card off the top, and a treasure, with Gabe on his second main casting the Tutored Ragavan, and ending his turn with a Smothering Tithe. Fernando untaps and doesn't pay the tithe. He casts a Swiftfoot Boots and passes it there. Hidden also doesn't pay the 2, and makes 3 green off the carpet. He then plays out a Polluted Delta as land, and then for 5 casts a Seedborn Muse, who resolves, with Hidden then following it up with a Cut Soul, to which Fernando responds with a Reality Shift targeting the Seedborn, although Hidden has a floating blue, which he uses on a Flusterstorm. Cut Soul will resolve, with Hidden then moving to combat. He sends his Orc army at Fernando, and off connect draws off Cut Soul, although unfortunately for Hidden, he's lacking in white mana as he passes the turn. Rick and Hidden both untap, with Rick paying for the Smothering Tithe. He has a Tundra as land and once again hits Fernando with his Mindblade Render, drawing a card and making a treasure off connect. Although it looks like he doesn't have much to do, as Rick then sacrifices a treasure to exile a Soul Ring off the top of his library. He will cast the artifact and then sacrifices another treasure, this time finding a Wild Growth, which he still casts, passing it there, with Hidden then activating Thrasios at his end step. He tops and draws a Swan Song, this time paying the 2, as he then uses Deathrite to exile Drana and Linvala from Gabe's graveyard. Gabe and Hidden untap, with Gabe then heading to combat. He sends his Bird Ranger Captain at Hidden and the Rev at Fernando. There are no blocks, with Gabe making 2 treasures and sealing 2 cards, with Gabe on his second main paying 2 life to Tymna, and then following all that up with a Cut Soul of his own, which resolves, as he then casts a Birthing Pod, and with this, the table then realized they just lost. Granted, Hidden will Thrasios for nothing, but with the pod, Gabe is then able to cast a Felidar Guardian from hand, and then pod into Kiki Jiki to make infinite cats, and along with the Goblin Bombardment, ping the table down. Game review. Man, I thought I had that game, but I guess that's what happens when you let someone that's already ahead get a silence effect going. It was unfortunate as I also was holding a win, but I couldn't go for it with the Goblin Bombardment, letting Gabe kill any of my creatures even through the Cut Soul. Thanks to everyone that joined for the game, and before everyone leaves, I want to thank our special Patreon members, Slyfox and Holy Septic, for their support of the channel, along with all of our other Patreon supporters as well. And remember, never give up, even if you're dead on board. I'll see you guys later.